Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his country is ready to work under Donald Trump's, quote, strong leadership. Zelenskyy also called for a truce and said Kyiv is ready to sign a deal with the U.S. to extract minerals from Ukrainian soil. Now, Zelenskyy's comments came after the U.S. suspended all military aid for Ukraine's defense against Russia. Washington said it was pausing and reviewing support to ensure it, quote, contributes to a solution.
No more American ammunition for Ukraine's hungry guns. Millions of shells provided by the US have helped Ukraine fend off Russia's invasion since 2022. Now that support hangs in the balance, with all US military aid paused and under review. The Ukrainian Prime Minister stressed its importance for the country.
We count on US support. It is significant and includes the exchange of intelligence and the most important element, air defense, which protects our skies, cities, civil infrastructure and Ukrainian civilians. This is the US contribution.
On the streets of Kyiv, there was mixed reaction to the US decision.
I still think we can win, but we'll need more help from Europe.
America has become a selfish country. They're dropping Ukraine and they're dropping Europe. We need to get closer to Europe.
Our leaders are to blame for most of it. We're so dependent on outside support. They should have been more diplomatic.
I'm happy that America has stopped the aid, because that will stop the war. If you stop refueling a car, eventually it will stop.
Before the freeze was announced, President Trump made clear again that he wanted Zelenskyy to reach a peace deal with Russia's Vladimir Putin.
We have to make a deal, and the deal can be made very fast. It should not be that hard a deal to make. It can be made very fast. Now, maybe somebody doesn't want to make a deal, and if somebody doesn't want to make a deal, I think that person won't be around very long. That person will not be listened to very long, because I believe that Russia wants to make a deal. I believe certainly the people of Ukraine want to make a deal.
It's not yet clear how long Trump's aid pause will last or what its full scope will be. The US has sent Ukraine tens of billions of dollars in military equipment, including armoured vehicles and munitions, since Russia's full-scale invasion. While Trump hasn't announced any new support for Kyiv since taking office, billions in aid promised under Joe Biden's presidency, but not yet delivered, will now be stopped in its tracks.
Let's go more on The View from Ukraine now and bring in our correspondent, Nick Connolly. Nick, the Ukrainian president has published a remarkable statement on X saying he's ready to work under Donald Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts, starting negotiations ASAP, making suggestions of his own of what a truce could look like, saying that he's ready to sign a minerals deal whenever and wherever, basically. Is this Zelenskyy groveling to Trump?
I don't think it's as grovelling as Trump probably expects and wants. He called the altercation in the Oval Office end of last week regrettable. He remembered the fact that it was Trump who gave Ukraine Javelin missiles under his first time in office. But beyond that, there wasn't much in the way of mea culpa or kind of, being more obviously kind of the one to say sorry to Trump. So I'm not sure this will do it, but certainly this is development. This is a step towards Trump, something we didn't see in the last couple of days. But I think, even though we were going to see more Ukrainian efforts to engage Trump, as obviously European partners also asked him to do, I don't think in terms of the actual nitty-gritty, in terms of the terms of a ceasefire, we are going to see that much change, because people here are convinced that, this is just about Trump wanting to say that he's resolved the war in a hurry and then move on, abandon Ukraine, not provide further support. And then, they are pretty convinced here that Vladimir Putin wants to come back and take this country in full. He still talks about Ukraine being basically a made-up country, a historical mistake, and he still claims basically all of Ukraine as being kind of Russian historical territory. So there is a real worry here that Trump is trying to wash his hands of Ukraine and just move on to other things. And I think for now the Zelenskyy team are not going to let him do that. They just don't want to be blamed for the talks collapsing, which people here still think will collapse when they do happen.
Ukraine and its allies have been scrambling to practice damage control after last week's falling out in the Oval Office. We just saw the pictures there again. Europe responded with solidarity and plans for ramping up defense capabilities. How did events reverberate in Kyiv? What dominated the discussion there?
I think this is all very welcome from a Ukrainian perspective. There's a sense that Europe is finally taking ownership of this, isn't just waiting for Trump to announce what he's doing and then Europe just struggling to kind of grope towards some kind of a response. So the idea that we now have the UK and France being quite clear that they are willing to send peacekeepers and also maybe protect the skies, that is all something that is very, very welcome. Obviously, the numbers are probably still lower than the Ukrainians would want. We're hearing, talk of 20, 30, 40,000. That still is probably not enough to secure what is a 1,000-kilometre front line. But certainly there is a sense that Europe has finally been scared by those pictures from the Oval Office into actually taking action and taking maybe some decisions that are going to be unpopular at home, asking their population to spend more for defence and also to send people here to Ukraine.
Yeah, you say Europe is scared, maybe even more so after the suspension of U.S. aid to Ukraine. What do you expect the immediate effect of that to be, especially on the front line?
So there are different estimates, but most analysts say it'll take 2-3 months to really be felt. We understand that intelligence is still being shared, which is crucial to allow Ukraine to use what little it has wisely and in a targeted way in terms of intercepting Russian missiles or seeing where Russia is about to attack. But certainly Europe is ramping up the kind of more basic stuff like artillery shells, but in terms of the high-tech stuff, Patriot missile systems or the kind of intelligence from satellites, that is all something that Europe for now hasn't been able to replace, and that is going to be very, very tough for Ukraine. They're going to have to fight with hugely more resources to achieve less. So it's going to be difficult.
That's DW's Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Thank you. Let's take a closer look with Justin Crump. He's a British Army veteran and CEO of the strategic advisory firm Sibylline. It's great to see you again, Justin. And let's start with the latest. Nice. Ukraine's president now saying he's ready to work under what he's calling Trump's strong leadership for peace. What do you make of that?
I mean, Zelensky's made no secret of, obviously, his intention to keep fighting in the war to get a just and lasting peace. And I think since the showdown we saw on Friday in the Oval Office, it's been misrepresented that he's not interested in peace at all, which I think couldn't be further from the truth. Ukraine's concerns are obviously that any peace that is achieved prevents a repeat of previous rounds of Russian aggression and ultimately the loss of the country. So, of course, what Ukraine's been looking for throughout this is a commitment to its lasting security, without doubt. And that's what's been missing from these negotiations. And it seems, of course, at this point, the US and Trump in particular, Vance as well, have really kind of started singling Zelenskyy out as the obstacle to peace. So, of course, in his messaging now, he's trying to make it very clear that he is not that obstacle. But again, he's looking for a just and lasting peace. He's looking for long-term security. The deal being offered, it was suggested by Ukraine in the first place, but in return for security guarantees at the moment are very unclear. So that situation hasn't been resolved, but I think we're going to see the US, as they are trying to do at the moment, putting the pressure on to Zelenskyy personally, in particular over this, potentially to try and find someone more amenable to carry forward the process on the US's terms, and indeed, to some extent, it seems Russia's terms, which raises many questions.
Very much so. For now, aid remains suspended. The U.S. has been Ukraine's, or had been, one has to say now, Ukraine's most important military backer in these past 3 years. How long could Ukraine hold out without U.S. military aid?
I mean, Ukraine holds stockpiles. I mean, they're not taking something from the border, putting it straight to the front lines and using it. And Ukraine's had aid stopped before for U.S. political reasons, domestic reasons on that occasion. And has been able to carry on fighting. But of course, if you don't know where your ammunition is going to come from in 3 or 4 months' time, you can't carry on using it at the same rate. You have to be more careful. And you've got to put a lot of effort into thinking about alternatives and how you can ramp up your own production, which Ukraine has been doing, and what support you might be able to get from Europe, and obviously pledges of substantial additional support. So Ukraine can keep fighting. And Ukraine doesn't really have much choice other than to keep fighting to try and get the best possible peace that they can get with Russia. What they're going to miss is some of the more high-end weapon systems, particularly the Patriot system, which is used to shoot down incoming ballistic missiles. That's something that I'm going to have trouble with. And some of the intelligence support. Now, at the moment, we think that intelligence support from the US, which pretty critically is continuing. But of course, that's the next thing that could potentially be turned off to carry on trying to pressure Ukraine in the current situation.
What would that mean for Ukraine if that intelligence sharing that, as far as I know, up until now has been going through NATO, were to be cut off?
The US has capabilities in NATO that no one else has. No one in Europe can fully step up to the level the US has been able to offer, particularly with capabilities based in space. And of course, there are other things like Starlink capability provided through Elon Musk companies that could also be turned off to affect things. And there's no obvious replacement for those at this moment in time. That's something that Europe's working on for the long term, I think, particularly after the last week. But currently, there are no alternatives. That doesn't stop Ukraine from fighting. And I think the real cost of this lack of supply is going to be paid in lives within Ukraine. But it's not going to stop them from fighting. It's just going to make the fighting harder for them. And so again, the loss is material. It will affect the Ukrainian war effort. It won't stop the Ukrainian war effort. And I think that's the key line as that gets rolled back. But Ukraine does not have the option to cease fighting here. And when we talk about peace and Russian readiness for peace, of course, Vladimir Putin could stop the fighting tomorrow if he so wished, or he could indeed not be launching mass raid on Ukrainian cities. And there's no sign of Russia letting up at the moment, which I think, again, gives Ukraine no choice except to do everything it can with what it has and what they can get.
Talking about what they can get, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen has just presented a plan to mobilize some 800 billion euros for Europe's defense and to help provide immediate military support for Ukraine in light of that U.S. decision, even though she didn't mention Trump and what we just learned overnight. How far could that go to fill the gap?
I mean, a long way. I mean, the US and Trump misrepresented the amount of help the US has given. It's a very substantial amount of aid. They are, of course, the single largest donor, but Europe has committed a lot as well to Ukraine's defense. Germany, notably, and obviously UK, France, and others have all put forward quite large amounts and can do more. I mean, Europe does have the resources if it makes difficult political decisions to shift spending away from other areas towards defense and security. And I think there is now a feeling in Europe that there is no alternative to that. And so it's not surprising that more is being done. Again, some of those really critical US capabilities are very hard to replace. But in terms of providing, for example, ammunition for artillery, providing support for drone operations and other things that Ukraine is improving at, low-level air defenses, particularly countering drones. Again, ballistic missiles, much more complicated to counter against, even for Europe at the moment. All of those areas, Europe can do more. And of course, the question becomes, is it cheaper to support Ukraine and defeat the Russians now, stop Russian aspirations in Ukraine, or wait and have the Russians closer to Europe's borders and potentially be facing a more difficult position in a few years' time? I think the equation becomes we need to stop Russia in Ukraine. That's been the strategy throughout. And Europe, therefore, really needs to put its effort into that rather than rearming the rest of Europe first and leaving Ukraine at this stage. So it's good to see resources mobilizing towards keeping Ukraine in the fight. And again, that all helps Ukraine's chances of getting a just and lasting peace. I think with what was being offered by the US at the start, Ukraine had no guarantees. Russia's being offered a lot of concessions to stop fighting. That did not look very balanced. Europe has the ability here to try and shift that situation, more very delicate situation with the US that we want to keep involved, but to try and shift that towards a better peace for Ukraine in any subsequent negotiations. So any and all aid now will help show that Ukraine remains in the fight and stop the Russians from taking advantage of the situation.
Justin Crump, a good friend of the program. Thank you so much. Always great having you on.
Thank you, Nicole.